All right, good morning. I want to thank the planners for inviting me here today. And the title of the presentation or this session is Managing AMR Risk in Humans with Applied Veterinary Medicine and Science. And I had to kind of think through what that meant to me. So this is my perspective on this topic. First, a little bit about me. I'm a chicken vet. It's what I've done my whole career. For 35 years. I've worked for 2 top 10 broiler chicken companies for the last 25 years with a company called Mountaire Farms. And the reason you haven't heard of Mountaire Farms is because we're unbranded. We're a mid-Atlantic company. We've just opened our 4th plant and we'll be the 5th largest company next year, almost as big as Purdue Farms. And you've heard of Purdue because they're a national brand. Our conventional production practices were replaced with certified responsible antibiotic use practices in December of 2016, and I'll talk some more about that later. So, to me, all antibiotics are a shared resource, and they have shared risks. And as our moderator said, if you think you understand AMR, it really hasn't been explained to you. It's very complex. Like this is one of a zillion diagrams you can find online and in, publications. But there's 2 buckets that come from animal agriculture on this diagram. And one is kind of the land animals. And then you also have aquaculture that often we don't, kind of think about, coming from the land. So, to me, if we're going to manage AMR risk in vet medicine, you've heard of the 12-step program, right? I think it's kind of a 2-step program for us, veterinarians. The first step is we got to admit that, veterinary medicine is part of this problem. Okay. I had Steve Solomon talk at a poultry health meeting a few years ago on AMR, and I asked him, I said, well, do the physicians think it's the vets and the vets think it's the physicians? And he goes, yeah, the physicians think it's you guys. And I said, well, we think it's you guys. But we got to quit doing that, right? We all have a piece of this. And so I think that it's very important that we just, raise our hand. Our company raises 8 million chickens a week. The way we use antibiotics can affect AMR and foodborne pathogens. Just say it out loud, right? So we got to do our part. Take ownership of it. And then the second step then, if we take ownership of it, is we have to commit to health programs and strategies that use best antibiotic stewardship practices as part of a holistic, responsible animal care program. Okay? So we have to use responsible practices, not some of the takeout programs that are being marketed. So if we admit that vet medicine is part of the problem, it means all of us, right? All veterinarians, food animal veterinarians, companion animals. I was glad to see Bill Flynn include companion animals in the FDA efforts yesterday. Zoo and, wildlife. Do we want antibiotics used in a petting zoo properly? Sure we do, right? The educators and the researchers, are we teaching this properly as part of the curriculum today? I certainly hope so. And then specifically in my neck of the woods, poultry production, so the concern is that we're going to get an acquired foodborne illness from some contact with poultry, and we're going to have a treatment failure because of prior antibiotic use on the farm. There's been a lot of risk analyses done on this problem, and this says the scenario, the kind of the perfect storm of all this happening are pretty low, but they're not zero. And these CDC numbers. There's 2 million AMR infections and 40,000 deaths. In the 2 buckets commonly related to poultry foodborne pathogens, which are Salmonella and Campi, it's 400,000 infections and 120 deaths. But any illness or deaths attributed to AMR from poultry is too many. And so, and also there's this kind of hard to measure, hard to estimate the risk from environmental release of bacteria from commercial poultry production sites. And the more I get into this, I think this is actually a pretty substantial piece of the puzzle that we need to learn more about. So I was glad to see Dr. Cook yesterday talk about that some. So if you think about responsible animal care, then we want to raise healthy animals, we want to minimize AMR risk for humans, and those are not opposing things, okay? And there's been great progress in where antibiotic stewardship in poultry. And, recently we had a poultry antibiotic use report. So this is not an antibiotic sales report. This is an antibiotic use report that Dr. Randy Singer put together. I think Bill Flynn mentioned it yesterday. And so it looks like this. It contains data from 80% of the chickens produced in the United States and 70% of the turkeys produced in the United States. So there's about 9 billion chickens produced. So this is data from 8 billion chickens. So it's pretty significant numbers. And there's difference between chickens and turkeys, for those of you that don't know that. Some of the chickens we grow are pretty big today, though, so you may get confused. But a short lifespan kind of helps on antibiotic use, right? There's less days for illness. All in, all out practices, right? Where we don't have multi-age facilities, so some of the things in chickens kind of give us a little bit of an edge on antibiotic use or disease control in general, really. Turkeys live longer. Chickens live 6 to 8 weeks. Turkeys can live for more than 6 months, right? But the data is very encouraging. These are the chicken results over the 5-year period that Randy studied. Hatchery use of antibiotics has decreased pretty much down to almost nothing. Gentamicin was the most commonly used antibiotic in the hatchery. And so we inject vaccine in embryos, live embryos, and we leave a hole in there. And that's a source of contamination because we put a needle in there, we took it out, we took the eggs out, we handled them, we put them back in the incubators, or in the hatchers rather. So that's a source of bacterial contamination. And that little bit of gentamicin was kind of used for that to kind of prevent that from being a problem. But that's not judicious use of antibiotics, right? So that's pretty much gone. Medically important in-feed antibiotic. I've done this for 35 years. Tetracycline really was never a big use in poultry feeds. Virginiamycin was. And where, we can debate whether virginiamycin is medically important and a big deal with human AMR infections, but it's kind of on the list that's getting older, Bill. It's getting older. That we hope to see reviewed. But all these water treatments have also gone down quite a bit. And you see on the right-hand side that there's a shift to drugs that are considered non-medically important. So I think all these are good judicious use practices. And the turkey data is also very favorable. Again, a longer lifespan animal, right? Harder to make the same improvements on. Where hatchery use got cut in half. Again, that was mostly gentamicin. Tetracycline use has gone down in the feed. Virginiamycin was not, I'm not sure it was cleared in turkeys. I'm not sure. No, it was not. Good. But you can see there's reductions in the water treatments also. So we have a good story to tell. But before we high five everybody, some progress has come from voluntary marketing programs, and the voluntary marketing program I'm talking about is called No Antibiotics Ever. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. It's the most common animal production meat label claim. All meat label claims have to be approved by FSIS. And so that means you have to verify this program to be able to put that on your package. And about half the people, if you look at all these consumer polls, more than half of people think that NAE is about consuming harmful levels of antibiotic residue. Okay? And so they see a package that says no antibiotics ever, and they see one that's not labeled, and it's called an absence label. So that implies that that practice may be in here, right? And so they think they're going to buy this one, they're going to be eating something that's going to harm them. And we know that's not true. And just, consumer understanding about AMR and foodborne pathogens potential is just very hard for them to understand. Where NAE is a package-based certification. So we start all the animals with no antibiotics. If some of them get sick, then we got to treat them. We should treat them. And then they got to get diverted, and it creates what I call second-class chicken. So there's something wrong with it, because we can't put NAE on it anymore. And that's a problem. So it creates competing priorities. Do we keep the chickens in the box, or do we address challenges to animal health? All this began in 2013 as a kind of a marketing program. Fielddale Farms was one of the first companies to start it, and there was a very high market premium initially, like $1 a pound for boneless breast. To put that in perspective, boneless breast is selling for less than $1 a pound now. So if you could get $1 premium, then you were getting double, right? It's a big number. And then from 2013 to 2019, the NAE production volume has gone up about tenfold. And normally when supply goes up, what happens to price? Price goes down, right? So the current market premium is pretty low, 10 to 20 cents a pound. So here's a graph showing that progression of production. Starts in 2013, it's hanging out around 5%. And then it really jumps up there in 2017. And the reason it jumps up is when Tyson entered the space. Tyson produces 25% of all chickens in the United States. Okay. So we're top heavy in our industry. So when they jumped in, they doubled the market, basically. So how does that relate to pounds sold? Well, it's half the chickens produced. It's about 11% of pounds sold are labeled no antibiotics ever. So you say, well, how can that be? Well, it's the premium cuts that people are willing to pay a premium for. So it's boneless breast. It could be a little bit of boneless dark meat. But, nobody's going in the store saying, hey, give me those NAE leg quarters for 25 cents a pound more. Right? So only 20% of the chicken is being labeled as NAE. 80% is going out in normal channels. So there's unintended consequences of these programs. I'm going to share some mortality data and then a survey of veterinarians that Randy Singer did. And I'm only going to show you a couple of questions from his survey, but I'm going to show you the responses from broiler veterinarians that take care of NAE chickens. So, and I call them unintended consequences. I mean, it sounds good that we're going to raise all our animals. We're never going to treat them with an antibiotic. But again, I said my company does 8 million chickens a week. Like that's about the population of New York City. Is it a reasonable expectation that nobody in New York is going to need an antibiotic prescription for an illness? This is not a realistic expectation. And it's not a realistic expectation for chickens either. So we're going to talk about mortality. Let me go back, sorry. Okay, here's our mortality trend in the United States for the last 90 years since 1925. And you see a nice downward slope. And then you see this little slope change. And you say, well, and it's kind of the start of the NAE programs. You say, well, that's not much of a change, really. Well, if you get into it, it definitely is a slope change, right? Like we got down to under 4%. Now we're back up to 5%. And you say, well, how do we know that's from NAE, right? Maybe it's just harder to raise chickens. Well, all the chicken companies belong to a benchmarking economic service, and so I asked them to do a comparison. And it's basically half the chickens compared to the other half of the chickens, right? Because it's 50% of the production. And this is the mortality difference. And the mortality difference, really what I want you to see from this slide is that there's always a gap. And the blue line is NAE, red are all others, actually. And the NAE is always higher. So, chickens are dying to get in the box, so to speak, here. And it's just not a good outcome for the chickens, especially. Here's a couple questions from Randy's survey. He asked these 42 NAE vets, chicken vets, how does NAE impact the health and welfare of the chickens? Does it make it worse or does it make it better? Well, 29 of them said it makes it significantly worse or slightly worse. So that's not, and that matches the mortality data, right? And then he asked this question, and he asked them if they agree or disagree with this statement. There are times that maintaining an NAE label has priority over animal health and welfare. And you kind of want the answer to this to be where not only no, but kind of hell no, right, as a veterinarian. And the answer was 22, more than half of the veterinarians either strongly agreed or somewhat agreed that, yeah, keeping them in the box has priority over taking care of the animals at times. And so where this is also troubling. So where NAE is not such a good idea for the chickens, then, what's the solution? In my view, the solution is to integrate antibiotic stewardship into responsible animal care programs. And so the goal is for responsible antibiotic use, not necessarily antibiotic reductions. And I think the most important thing that we need to do as food animal veterinarians especially is to employ strategies to reduce the need for antibiotics. So we need to optimize our husbandry and sanitation practices. We need to optimize our biosecurity programs. We've got to optimize our vet health plans. We've got to have a good vaccination program. We've got to include some non-antibiotic alternatives. But we've got to try to prevent the need for antibiotics. And then when we do need to use an antibiotic for a health challenged flock, we need to follow best antibiotic stewardship principles. And in my view, this is what that means. It means that we should reserve medically important antibiotics to treat and control disease. We shouldn't give Garrisol to every chicken we make, right? That's not judicious antibiotic stewardship practice. They should not be used for prevention purposes to all your animals or administered in a regular and repeating manner. And we need to treat the fewest number of animals possible. In poultry, it's going to be kind of a house of chickens. But it used to be the house next door because they were probably going to get sick, right? But that's not the way we do it now. And then the drugs that are not deemed important to humans can be used in accordance with FDA rules. And often, if you use non-medically important drugs, it reduces your need for medically important drugs. We need to measure treatment outcomes. It's something that we don't commonly do. And we got to record and track all antibiotic use. And then we use all this data to review and update our vet health plans on a regular basis based on these outcomes. So in conclusion, antibiotics are a shared resource with shared risks. All users must do our part to preserve their effectiveness now and for the future. And this includes us. This includes all veterinarians. Thank you for your time.